Welcome everyone to our coffee and conversation. This is also part of the Acadia Senior College Best of Acadia program. Acadia Senior College is one of the college's most important partners on the island. We're really excited to have all of you here. I'm Darron Collins. I'm the president of the college and an alumnus from the class of 1992. And obviously we have Kevin Schneider here, the new superintendent from Acadia National Park. Let's give him a hand to start. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today, Darron.
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So this is going to be kind of an informal talk. That's why we're trying to look very informal, like we're just in somebody's living room having a conversation. A little tough on the stage, but and we'll talk for half an hour, back and forth, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So be sure to be thinking about that.
Save your hard questions for Darron.
That's right. Yeah. Don't ask Kevin anything, hard. Yeah. I was wondering, can you tell me a little bit about little Kevin? Like, I'd like to know where you grew up and what you were like. And then, as a kid, was there that point where you said, I want to work for the NPS. I want to be a ranger, or how did that come to be when you were a kid?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks everybody for coming today. It's great to see board members for Friends of Acadia and Schoodic Institute here. It's great to see employees, former employees, volunteers, the collective community. So thank you everyone for coming out today. Really appreciate it. So I grew up outside the city of Chicago, in the suburbs of Chicago, and I really did not grow up visiting national parks. My younger years were spent playing a lot of backyard baseball in the summer and a lot of soccer. I was a soccer player. And Chicago's kind of a sports town. There's not, honestly, a whole lot of sort of, environmental consciousness in Chicago. I mean, there's just not a lot of natural areas around the city. It's a city. And so I did not grow up visiting national parks. My parents were runners, and so they were pretty fit. And my sister moved to Arizona, to Phoenix, when I was in middle school. And so we went to Phoenix to see her for sort of spring break. And it was there that we started hiking as a family, because when you travel to Phoenix from Chicago, that's one of the things you have to do, is go climb Squaw Peak and Camelback Peak. And we went up to Sedona and hiked around Sedona, if you've ever been there. These red rock, spectacular sandstone formations. And that's when I sort of started to get turned on to the outdoors, and to think there was something more than just backyard baseball and soccer and girls, at that age. and then in high school, I got a camera, as a lot of high school kids do. And there are three things you can take pictures of if you're a kid in Chicago. You can take pictures of people. Plenty of interesting people
Girls.
in Chicago. That would be right. Really nice.
Right. Yeah.
You could take pictures of architecture. Chicago's got great architecture, sort of the urban scene. Or you could go outside and do nature photography. And somehow that's where I landed. And so I would go to a place called the Morton Arboretum, which is pretty well known. It was 10 minutes from my house. I became a member. I mean, for a 14-year-old or 15-year-old to become a member and send $35 it seemed like a lot of money, but it was a good investment. And I'd go there sort of after school or after soccer practice when I had time, and I'd go for walks and I'd take pictures. And that's where nature really, I sort of found refuge there as a adolescent, dealing with a lot of the kinds of issues adolescents do. And then when I was 17 years old, I did the Student Conservation Association.
That's right, we have that in common, yeah.
And I did that in North Cascades National Park. I spent a month in the backcountry of North Cascades National Park in Washington State. It's known as kind of America's Alps, just spectacular, jagged peaks that are heavily glaciated. And with 5 other high school kids, I maintained trails, didn't see an electrical outlet for a month, didn't see a car for a month. We were camped out. And I said, that was really the combination of those things, and it was at that moment when I said, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so that was between my junior and senior year of high school.
And that was 1997? Right.
Close.
Right.
1993.
Okay, yeah. See, I'm supposed to be the young guy here, and then you come and, Do you have is that you?
Yeah, that was it. And so after SCA, I said, okay, I need to go to college to a place where it's going to really allow me to fulfill these dreams.
Yeah.
And so that the rest is kind of history.
Wait, that was
at Colorado State.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
sorry,
it's a good program. It's all right. Yeah.
I didn't spend a weekend on campus at CSU. You know, a lot of freshmen in college, they're kind of doing, things that freshmen in college do. But I didn't spend a weekend on campus there until really November, when it was too snowy to hike. And I wound up I didn't have a car, so I was at the will of whoever had a car, and I wound up kind of buddying up with a guy who just wanted to climb 14,000-foot mountains. They call them 14ers in Colorado, and I think there's about 54 of them in Colorado. So there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah.
And so that first semester of school, we just went out and
Yeah.
bagged 14ers, and it was great.
And you've pretty much spent your career in the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service.
Yeah,
right?
if parks were to go away tomorrow, I'm pretty worthless to society.
Right. So tell us a little bit about the trajectory, and where is important, but I'm also kind of interested in what's the culture of the national park system like, and how did you kind of maneuver your way through that to get into a leadership role? I mean, at some point, either somebody pegged you as, hey, this guy's got leadership potential, or something happened, right? How did that work?
Yeah, well, I worked on the trail crew through college at Rocky Mountain National Park in the summers. And, if you like to hike, which I do, I mean, if I could do one thing the rest of my life, it would be to walk and to hike. But I worked on the trail crew at Rocky Mountain National Park through college, and I can remember telling my parents in college that, all I really wanted to do was do trail work the rest of my life and, be out hiking. And that would be a great career. My parents were asking me questions like, well, does it come with benefits? Which seasonal work at that time did not. That's actually would have been an improvement from that time. And, and they were saying, you need to get a real job, Kevin. But aside from that sort of pressure, I actually, in my junior and senior year of college, I worked for the National Parks Conservation Association during school. Their regional office was in Fort Collins. NPCA as they're known. And NPCA's sort of like the watchdog group for the National Park Service. And so their regional office was in Fort Collins. They had a National Board of Trustee member who was one of my professors at Colorado State. And so, I had a little bit of an in with the organization, and he made some introductions, and I got an internship, just working 15 hours a week for NPCA. And I was reviewing sort of park planning documents, park policy initiatives for parks in that region of the country. And that's where I think I became interested in sort of these thorny management, kind of complex planning and policy issues, was through that job at NPCA. And that's where I realized, there is sort of something more than just getting out and hiking. I can do that on my own time, and occasionally for work on the best days. But I was interested in trying to find a way to make a difference in the parks. And so I was fortunate enough to get hired in our Washington headquarters right out of college. And I thought I could go to Washington, D.C. and change the world. A very idealistic kind of guy. I still am very idealistic.
Yeah.
And I did that. I went to D.C., and I don't know about the change the world part, but I did move to D.C. and worked in our public affairs office there, which was a great orientation and exposure to really everything going on in the national parks. And so, kind of the culture of the agency, I think we do have a very strong organizational culture. We have a culture that's really dominated by love for the mission. And many of us say we bleed green because, we care so deeply about the parks. And so, it's really a very personal kind of commitment. And it's part of, I think, for many of us who wear the green and gray, it's sort of part of who we are at our core. Yeah. And even sort of affects how we look at other things in life, of this sort of idea of deep ecology, of letting nature take its course, of letting these places be unimpaired, that there are some places that, we should just leave alone and be only visitors to. Yeah.
So speaking of visiting, I mean, you came to us, I can say us, right? You came to us through Grand Tetons, right? And you've been here how many months now?
About 6 months.
6 months. So what's one place that just lit your eyes up in terms of Acadia? And tell us about like you getting there and your family a little bit. Like what do they think of the park?
Yeah. I've had a number of those experiences here. I mean, it seems like every time I go out in the park, I have kind of an experience like that. But there have been a couple of just highlights, and I can tell a couple of those stories. One is I was out for a run. I'm a runner as well, and so I was out for a run at about 6 in the morning in March, and I was running on the carriage roads around Hulls Cove Visitor Center, and there's that one place, and I hadn't run these roads, I hadn't been on this section of the carriage roads yet, so I was discovering it for the first time. And that section of the carriage road that kind of overlooks Hulls Cove, and you see the water and the
Paradise
islands.
Hill, yeah, right.
And so I'm trying to gasp for breath as I run up that hill, and I come around the corner, and here is the sun rising in the most beautiful shades of orange and blue, and it was one of those moments of, oh yeah, this is why we're here, And I've had several of those. One place, with the family, Acadia National Park was just voted best national park for families, and I understand why. I was at Hunter's Beach, a place you recommended to me, and Rodney recommended to me, saying as this is a must-do kind of thing. And so I was there on the Saturday of July 4th weekend. We showed up at about 11 in the morning to the parking lot, and for those of you who know the area, it's only about a 4-car parking lot, and we were the 4th car there. So this is, again, 4th of July weekend, a peak time here. We were about the 4th car there, walked in. There were never more than about 8 people on that gorgeous beach, and we probably spent with the family. Now this one's with my whole family. I've got 2 little kids, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my wife, and we probably spent 2 or 3 hours at Hunter's Beach just monkeying around and eating lunch and having a great time. And so it's experiences like that that really recharge my batteries. I mean, I know for myself that I need to be out in the park and reconnecting with park resources. I mean, that's why I do this job. I only lasted a year and a half in Washington, D.C. because I learned very quickly that my heart was in the parks and that I needed to be out, hiking and biking and, being visitors to these places. I think that's really important for all of us who care about Acadia, is to have a personal connection with the place. Whatever you like to do, you don't have to be a hiker like me, but having that sort of deep connection with the place, I think, is really important.
And family adjusting, okay?
Yeah, they're doing great.
Having been through it 5 years ago, I get the
and moving with kids is a challenge. But my wife grew up in Bangor, so in many ways, this is I had to import her to Wyoming, and so she's lived for the last 13 years in the West, since we've known each other. But she, grew up in Bangor and grew up coming to Acadia and got her bachelor's and master's degree at UMO. So she's this is no surprises to her, which has made this really nice.
That's great.
And in some ways, sort of surreal and like full circle for Kate.
Coming back, So Director Jarvis, who is the director of the National Park System, and it has a kind of a mandate that, as I understand it, asks you as superintendent to function something like maybe a college president even. Like it's not just about managing resources, right? That you're asked increasingly to raise money, to serve as the liaison to the wider community, and plus you want to go run and explore. With all those things in your head, what does a typical day look like for you? Or is there a typical day? What are the different kind of categories of things you need to do?
Yeah, well, the typical day involves a lot of meetings. The typical day involves a lot of meetings, whether it's with staff or with outside partners, community groups. A lot of my role is very externally focused, and so as it should be, focused on the communities, and so when there's a question or an issue that comes up, helping to find solutions and really being a problem solver. I think the best days are getting to get out in the park with other people, that's what I really enjoy, is going for a hike with somebody, and I think that I took a leadership class from a well-known kind of leadership organization, training organization. It was really fortunate to have the experience. But one of the exercises they had us do over the course of the week was to just walk around, like literally an office building, walk around an office building and have a conversation with somebody about an issue we were dealing with. And, you know, the point of it was to show that, like, your brain chemistry, and I'm not a scientist here, but like there are different things that go on in your brain when you're physically moving and having a conversation. And I've seen it time and time again, where if I go for a walk with someone and have a meeting on a walk, the creativity and the innovation is tremendously more powerful than sitting in an office and having a meeting. So, you know, we don't have time to have all of our meetings that way, but I think it can be a very important way of having dialogue.
Yeah, good. That's good to hear. And one of the things I'm always, each park, each unit, right, has its own feel to it. And I'm curious, what's the most striking similarity and my most striking difference coming from coming from Grand Tetons? What really jarred you as like, wow, this is different? Yeah.
I think the parks actually have more in common than they do different in some ways. I mean, even though the resources are obviously totally different. I mean, Grand Teton's really big mountains and no ocean and that sort of thing. And so, you know, there's that obvious difference. But both parks were established really by John D. Rockefeller Jr. You know, and so you have this theme of the Rockefeller family. Yeah. And, you know, the good that family has done for our country in conservation is extraordinary. Yeah. It's remarkable. And, you know, in our 100th anniversary here, we would be remiss without remembering how much they have done, not just for Acadia, but for other parks, Virgin Islands National Park, for example. Yeah. And Grand Teton, the Valley lands were purchased by John D. Rockefeller Jr. Through a company that he created to sort of quietly buy up the land there. It took about 20 or 30 years for Grand Teton to ultimately become a park as a national park and to acquire those valley lands. But, you know, so both parks have this sort of very at their core relationship with private philanthropy. Yeah. And that continues, you know, to a very powerful degree at both park units. And both parks, you know, you don't wind up in Jackson Hole, and I don't think you really wind up in this area, on this island, without sort of very deliberative kind of decision making.
You don't pass through Mount Desert Island, right?
Yeah.
Or Jackson Hole, right?
Yeah. So the people that live in these communities really live here because, for a lot of folks, the park. And they love to hike, they love to ski, you know, they love to be in the park. And so, you know, there's a relationship with the community that is unique. Now, what's different here is that the nature of Acadia is such that it's really sort of in the community and you know, it's interwoven in a way that is different from the Western parks. Right. Where there are times you don't know if you're in Acadia National Park or if you're in a community. Right. And that's great. I mean, that's part of what makes this place unique.
Yeah. Good. Now we'll get to a little bit more specific questions. You know, and when you were enjoying your time with the family on Hunter's Beach, right? This was a really busy weekend, right? And they had to close Cadillac Mountain, right, because of traffic. And something we're really obviously faced with is a transportation plan. Could you tell us a little bit about what the transportation plan is all about and how it could potentially affect the visitor experience?
Sure. Well, if you compare our visitation between 2015 and 2006, over that 10-year time frame, our visitation increased by 35%. If you look at this year, June is up alone by 17%. Year to date, we're up 21%. So 21%, if we hold that, I'm not sure that we will, but if we were to, you know, that's another 560,000 people coming to see us this summer. It's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
On top of, you know, the folks we already have. So I think it's a really, really important issue to Acadia's future. The thing about it is, you know, I've described that experience at Hunter's Beach, which was uncrowded, and that occurred 4th of July weekend. Yeah. The Tuesday after 4th of July, I had the opportunity to do a hike in the park in the morning, and I don't think we saw more than one other party on a 2.5-hour hike. Yeah. And we were not on a sort of remote trail necessarily. I
Right.
mean, we were in a relatively loved part of the park. And so, really this issue with congestion occurs at specific times of the year. It doesn't occur in January, obviously, and at specific locations like Cadillac and Ocean Drive.
Sure.
And so, trying to come up with a plan that gets that right. This summer, we're going to come out with preliminary alternatives, or probably this fall, really, that will look at some ideas for ways of managing transportation and capacity, in the park. I mean, at the end of the day, there's not enough parking spaces in Acadia National Park for everyone who wants to park here. Yeah. And so, is there a way to really improve people's experience? Because I think, we also had to close Ocean Drive that Sunday of 4th of July.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Cars were literally parked on both sides of the road from the entrance station to beyond Thunder Hole. And so it was at a level that we had never seen before. Yeah. And I hate, seeing things close. Yeah. I mean, I really, really do, because it's counter to what we do as an agency. We want to open these places up and let people enjoy them. But on the other hand, the staff and the rangers in the field need to be empowered to make the decisions they need to do to keep people safe and to be able to ensure that you can get an ambulance, and respond if there's an emergency. Yeah. So I see it as really sort of a failure when we have to close a road like that. And if you're a family who's traveled here for some distance and you show up at Ocean Drive expecting to have an experience and it's closed, I mean, that's not a good visitor experience. That's not a good outcome. So how can we get our arms around that and make sure that that family has the knowledge ahead of time that there's nowhere to park, or maybe they can do something to get a parking space and they're guaranteed of it. And if they can't, they take the bus. We've got a phenomenal mass transit system that's been in operation for many, many years now. Yeah.
Congratulations, too, on the recent LL Bean gift for Island Explorer. That's fantastic.
It's really, really important. Yeah. So, I think the transportation plan is going to be really important to Acadia's future. And, I'm really interested in hearing people's feedback on it and thoughts. We had some of that opportunity last year when we had public scoping, but this fall we'll continue it with these preliminary alternatives. And we won't have a preferred alternative. There's no sort of decision that's been made. We've got an open mind on what the best solution is. And, obviously, as sort of the new kid on the block here, my mind isn't made up on any potential solution, but we've got to look at different possibilities. We also have to be mindful of cost and how much it's going to cost to implement any of these alternatives. I mean, if you've read the paper, money is not the federal government's strong suit. So how do we be sort of, fiscally responsible to make sure that we can sustain and implement whatever it is that we want to do?
Right.
We've got the help of partners here and great partners, but it can't be on their shoulders alone by any means.
So building off that question a little bit, in Russia, I spent some time over in Russia, and the park system there is based on the Zapovednik, right? And the Zapovednik is essentially a walled off chunk of land where the only people that can go in and out of there are scientists. And that's a really different model from ours, obviously, probably for good reasons. But I know the park system is asking that we don't consider parks as islands, even though we're on an island. I mean, but both metaphorically and geographically, there is a porous boundary. And should we being the national park system and you specifically, about managing as part of a larger landscape, or is it just enough to worry about what's going on in your boundaries? How do you wrestle with that?
Well, we have to manage as part of a larger landscape. I mean, so many of the issues that we deal with, happen outside of our boundaries. Yeah. From clean air, and obviously one of the things that makes this place great is clean air. Yeah. And what contributes to our air quality is not generated within Acadia National Park or even on this island. What really drives our air quality is things that are happening some distance away. Climate change, is another one. And I think climate change for my generation of managers is really going to sort of push our minds in ways that hasn't been done for many, many years. I think climate change will sort of cause us to, or is causing us already, to really reevaluate our sort of management paradigm of since 1962 or so, our management paradigm has been this idea of natural regulation, of kind of hands off, let nature take its course.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that management paradigm is workable in the face of climate change, with change that is occurring at such a rapid pace.
Yeah.
Is that the right paradigm? Those are really good questions.
What are we seeing on what worries you in terms of climate change and the park on MDI? What are
20% of the plant species that were documented around the time of the park's creation are now gone from Acadia.
20%?
Not all that is related to climate change, but that's certainly a factor.
Yeah.
The forests that we see in Maine that we've kind of recognized as symbolic of this place, I mean, those could be moving north.
Yeah.
And forest types that we would see further to our south over the next 100 years could be becoming the more dominant forest type here.
But playing the devil's advocate, I mean, if that happens and we have, what's the big deal? Like, it just changes the forest. Is that symbolic, or is there something larger behind that that's a problem?
Well, I think when it's human caused, we have to really evaluate. Is enough enough?
Yeah.
Is this too much when humans are having that big of an effect on the environment? And Glacier National Park may not have any glaciers in the next 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
Is that a problem?
Yeah.
I would submit that it is. Redwoods and sequoia trees may not be able to exist within the ranges.
Right.
And so, it's having this fundamental effect on our world.
Right.
Polar bears are at risk. Can you imagine a world without polar bears?
Right. And the system how much was it set up like, okay, we want to make sure we got these kind of biomes covered, and if everything shifts, well, do we have to,
Right.
start from scratch kind of thing,
Yeah,
right?
that's right, yeah.
One more, what about fire? Like, fire it's a deeply seated issue to people on Mount Desert Island, and frankly, even to the College of the Atlantic. Like, what does the buildup of material in our, using, how did you describe it, kind of a hands-off approach? Is that something that Park Service worries about, or how might we deal with that?
Yeah, well, there's a number of factors with fire that are in play. We do, at parks across the country, do sort of mechanical thinning where we'll go out and do some treatments in specific locations, usually very specific to kind of protect certain assets.
Views
or if we have, for example, a high-value asset, we may do mechanical thinning if it's in a particularly location that's particularly prone to fire or to a wildfire. We'll do prescribed burns in parks, in some cases to sort of maintain a natural regime. And each ecosystem has a sort of a different fire regime that's adapted. In the face of climate change, we're seeing in the West much more intense fire seasons.
Sure.
If you look at federal spending on fire over the last 20 years, I think it'd be a pretty staggering trend that you would see in how much we're spending on fires. And so, I think we're getting actually more moisture here in Acadia National Park, 6 inches more rain than we had 100 years ago.
Really? That's
yep.
interesting.
So climate's going to affect different locations differently. In the West, we would see, so we may be getting more rain here, but less snow. Where you're seeing more rainy days in the winter.
That's bad.
I know, I like to ski.
I know you do.
and so that's not good. You're seeing the same kind of activity in the West, where you're getting, example in Grand Teton, you're getting more rain in the winter, whereas rain in the winter in Jackson Hole
that's really bad.
It's pretty rare.
Right,
But that's occurring 1 or 2 days a year now, whereas it was unheard of 20 or 30 years ago. And so that leads to then warmer runoff, or, warmer temperatures in the spring. So you have runoff that occurs in all the snowpack is running off over the course of a shorter period of time, and it's not a gradual spring runoff as it would have been, and that creates flooding, and then also sort of the water supply becomes at issue because it's all coming very quickly. So there's all these different effects, and we don't, I don't think we fully understand, what's going on with climate too. I mean, we know it's changing. We know that rapid change is going to be what we're going to be seeing into the future. It's hard to, that's a difficult
It's a tough
environment to
balance, right?
manage.
Because part of you wants, the
Right.
beautiful thing about the parks is, okay, let's figure it out before we jump in and try and make an adjustment, but
Yeah.
it's tough.
And are we going to get it wrong? I mean,
Are we
that's-
going to get it wrong?
That's
And
my
what are
fear.
the consequences
so
there? Yeah.
if you intervene, I mean, it's like a medicine. The first rule is to do no harm.
Right.
And so if you do some kind of intervention
Excuse me.
and you write a prescription, is it going to be the right one?
Yeah.
And I think that's the concern. Anything you do in nature, it's going to have all kinds of ripple effects.
Yeah. One more question. I'm sorry, I've got this one. But I do every year when our students go off and graduate, I do these kind of exit interviews, and I ask them, how they got to COA and what was great about it, what really attracted to them, and this, not surprisingly, every one of them this year said, the thing that one of the most important factors that drew them here was place and the park, which I think is fantastic, and it's what kind of drew me here. And if you could imagine a future, like we had this conversation already, but I want to build a really close partnership between the College of the Atlantic and the park, and I think we've been partnering for 45 years, and the museum is dedicated to that, and that's great. But what more could we do? What can you imagine where we could really hold COA and Acadia National Park? I'd like to be able to hold it up as a model for other parks and institutions of higher ed. Is that a good idea?
Well, learning, yeah, absolutely. I mean, learning is very important to us, and learning is fundamentally part of our mission as an agency.
Yeah.
And so, here you are as this incredible educational institution right in our backyard, as a neighbor. And so there is an opportunity to partner as we have in the past. I think it's a great partnership, and I would love to hear people's insights on, how can we sort of take this to the next level? It's clear to me that, for example, scientific literacy is not where it needs to be in our nation.
Yeah.
That's something that the National Park Service, as a sort of trusted brand in our country, can help with.
Yeah.
And so can College of the Atlantic, right? Creating people who are literate,
Ecologically literate. Right?
Members of our country is really, really important. But I worry about those kinds of issues. Are people, do they have the information they need to make good, informed decisions?
Right. Obviously, right now, your visitation is going like this, and your budget is going like this, right? And
right.
I think ultimately appropriations has got to make up that. You said it before. Partnership is great, but you need the money to do your work. But I see as a stopgap, or at least as a help, COA students, faculty, and staff, like really helping make sure that you can weather that difficult time. So I look forward to talking.
That's exactly right. Our visitation's up 35%. Our budget adjusted for inflation is down 8%.
How much?
8%.
8%. Yeah.
So, you're dealing with 35% more people, and they're coming in a longer season, which means we need to have more people on in October, more people on in May than we may have before.
We got
stretches
them. May and October are good.
Right. We'll sign up students.
Right, yeah.
And undergrads tend to work for a good price too.
They do. Yeah. So what about it? What questions do you have? Yeah.
We're very concerned about drones in the park, and I understand that it's against the federal regulations to have drones. But how do you get that information out to the public? Most visitors do not read the Federal Register before they visit the park. So do you print information to hand out to them? Do you put signage up at trailheads? How do you inform visitors how to be respectful of the park?
Kevin, can I ask you to just summarize that question so everyone can hear it?
Yeah, you bet. So the question was about drones and how do we make sure that folks understand that drones are prohibited in Acadia National Park, and how do we get information about our regulations out to park visitors? Drones are actually prohibited throughout all the national parks in our country. So it's illegal to land or take off a drone or pilot a drone on park property. Now, if someone's standing off park property and they're not landing it on the park or piloting on the park,
You can fly over.
potentially, yeah. Now, I don't want to give anyone any bright ideas here,
Sorry.
but we can only we don't control the airspace.
Right.
So we can only control it when it sort of touches the ground, either the human or the drone.
Yeah.
But clearly, they're not appropriate. I mean, I think when you're standing on the top of, Sargent Mountain, nobody wants to see a quadro thing flying around and buzzing them. And so, it is an ongoing challenge to get our messages out to park visitors about all the sort of rules in Acadia. There are, a number of rules about visiting Acadia, and those are really established to make sure that everyone has a good time and to try to, make sure that this place can be a great place for everyone to visit. So, it's kind of a full court press. I mean, I think there's a balance between having sort of large obtrusive signs at every trailhead that say no, 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 no. I mean, we don't want to be the land of no.
Right.
But on the other hand, making sure that people are informed.
Yeah.
Organizations like Leave No Trace are really important. We just had Leave No Trace in the park doing some workshops. Really important to help us get our messages out about how to responsibly visit Acadia and other national parks and how to leave no trace.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really important.
What else? Yeah.
Whenever I pick up the Islander, I see notices of accidents on the park. Some fatal, some not so fatal. And I wonder, I sometimes think that people regard this park as not a very dangerous place, and that there aren't sufficient warnings of the danger in the park. I mean, people falling off rocks and dying. I mean, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I agree. It shouldn't happen, and those are always tragedies. And they're hard on us when those occur too, and hard on our staff that have to be the responders. Similarly with our regulations, we can't put up a sort of handrail at every precipice.
Please don't.
In Acadia, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what we want to do. This is a wild land, and we want to sort of keep it that way and let people experience it on their own terms. When I was at Grand Teton National Park, and I climbed the Grand Teton, there were people that passed us who were climbing unroped in locations where if you would have fallen, you're probably not going to make it.
Yeah.
That's a decision they make, and we don't necessarily prohibit them from making that decision. And so, trying to let people, it's really a balance, I think, of trying to let people experience risk and nature on their own terms and not sort of impose some regulatory requirement on them in that too. And so, I think the thing that we need to do is make sure that people have the information so they can understand what the risks are they're taking, and then let folks make their own decision about what risks they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
I don't take my kids bicycling on Route 3, but would I be willing to potentially ride my bike on Route 3 where there's a good shoulder? So
Like we'll have in a few years.
like we'll
on
have,
ice,
right,
Yeah, yeah.
right, probably so.
Right.
If I want to go for a bike ride with my kids, I'm going to take them on the carriage roads
Right.
because those are, a very safe environment. So it's all, sort of this very personal, I think, risk management kind of equation that people have to
Yeah.
make. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the crush of visitors over the 4th of July weekend, I thought of the analogy with how we use electricity, and if we could give people incentive to use electricity off-peak. So I wonder if that's in any way applicable here. Have you thought about, or are there possibilities for having incentives or maybe disincentives to use the park at times when there's a crush of people? And I know that is in odds with when people have time off and so forth, but I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and
Maybe just brief that again. Yeah.
thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
So the question was, are there incentives that we could use, I think, to to sort of encourage people to visit at off-peak times, much like you might get a lower electrical cost if you're running your dishwasher in the evening or at night rather than during the daytime. Or your air conditioning, probably is the bigger driver. And so, yeah, that's certainly possible. So what you'd have to sort of look at, well, what are our incentives? So one incentive might be a fee. Our fee for a week is $25. In the context of a vacation to Maine and what it might cost, I would argue it's a bargain, for someone to, who's probably investing, $1,500 or more for the family vacation to Maine if you're coming here from outside the state. Yeah. The fee's a pretty small incentive or disincentive in that. But there could be other things. There could be times of the year when, and this will be the kinds of question our transportation plan will wrestle with. There could be times of the year when certain restrictions are in place, and that could be an incentive or a disincentive for someone to visit during that time if they don't want to have to deal with, that hypothetical restriction. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely something that, we could use. I'm not sure, I guess the only thing I would argue is I'm not sure, because our fees are so incredibly reasonable, that I'm not sure that the fee would ever sort of serve as much of an incentive or disincentive, unless we dramatically changed our fee structure and got it to the point where it was truly a barrier. But if we did that, then my concern would be, there is a certain demographic that we would be appealing to that may not be able to, and then another demographic that may not be able to afford to come. And I think, these are all Americans' national parks, and I think they're all part of our birthright as citizens of this great country, and that everyone should have equal access to them. So I think fees are appropriate, but I think they need to be modest too.
Sydney, I saw your hand go. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your insights and welcome here.
Thank you.
I had a question, kind of the fee-based structure idea. I see more and more tour groups like Back Roads or Bike Me, different things coming into the park. And that's a lot of people. Do we have any incentive or basis to charge a different fee to those operators that are utilizing our resource and charging great fees to their participants?
It's a great question, and so.
Sorry, Rip.
Thank you for the reminder. And so I think the question was really sort of about some of the commercial services like bicycle tours or some of the motor coach tours, and is there sort of a way of having incentives or different fees for them? And any kind of commercial activity, number one, in a national park always fits into a sort of a different management pigeonhole than a non-commercial activity. The idea that someone is profiting from the public's resource, therefore it's different. And so, the commercial activities in the parks, in some cases, we do get a return on that activity where we get a franchise fee, like we do at Jordan Pond House. There is an opportunity potentially to change how some of those commercial activities are managed. So in some cases right now, if they're handled under a commercial use authorization, this is probably more detailed than you want to know, but we don't get a return to the park beyond a permitting fee. But there may be an opportunity to see more of a return to the park for those. And that's, again, the kind of thing that the transportation plan will look at. Are we managing motor coaches, for example, under the right sort of vehicle administratively? There are advantages and disadvantages to all of these kinds of questions, so we'll sort through that.
And I'm guessing it's harder when it's a more porous boundary, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Because people are taking advantage of the commons in a way.
That's right. Yeah, and particularly with motor coaches, it's difficult because
what motor coach?
Like a tour.
Oh, okay. All right.
Where there are so many sort of motor coach companies that use the park. It's hard to have a contract with every one, and so anyway, they present. Yeah. That's a much more sort of amorphous.
So a motor coach comes up to the entrance fee at Ocean Drive. They have to pay
They pay a separate commercial use.
They do.
pay a separate entrance fee based on the size of the vehicle.
And that, they pay it right there. They don't have to do it in advance or anything.
Correct.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yes?
You mentioned the land of no, so I'm wondering about Washington. What's your feeling about the support for the national parks? And I'm wondering if you and your colleagues spend a lot of time working on that.
Well, it's very important. Parks have historically been, I think, very sort of bipartisan, and we've had champions on both sides of the aisle historically for the national parks, and I think that's really been great for us. I mean, frankly, parks are something that just about everybody can love. I think the partisanship in our country has just grown greater over the last 15 years or so, and that's, I think an open question whether that's good for democracy and governance when there can't be compromise and when there is such partisanship. But we're fortunate, I think, at Acadia to have a lot of support from our delegation here and interest. The park is very important to the state's economy. Our visitors in 2015 spent $250 million in gateway communities. It's a lot of money that our visitors are pumping into the economy. Now, national parks weren't set up to be economic engines.
Right.
I mean, that's not why we were created.
Remind us of the mission statement.
Yeah, we were created to preserve this place in an unimpaired condition and allow for people to enjoy it.
Ken Klein, who teaches public lands here, he made us memorize that mission statement.
I love
as part
it.
of the class. Right, yeah.
I love it. We have a very clear mission, and it makes my job easier than if I worked for the U.S. Forest Service, which has to manage for multiple use, because then you're trying to sort of manage these competing interests. And our mission really is more singular in a way, in that it's to protect the parks in an unimpaired condition and allow for people to enjoy them. But if we don't maintain the parks in an unimpaired condition, then future generations won't be able to enjoy them. So really, that's the first job. So anyway, we weren't created to be these economic engines. Our mission is to preserve the parks in an unimpaired condition. But the truth is, we are economic engines across the country, especially because a lot of parks are in rural locations. And so for these rural communities, the national parks that exist next to or within them are really, really important.
Yeah. Alan, go ahead. Yeah.
A quick comment on the other comment and then a personal question. And that was, we mentioned incentives to shift people's time of visit. Bartman, your way former president, previous superintendent, said that visitation tracked the number of rental rooms available on MPI.
Interesting.
The more places people could stay, the more people would come. And that's a major cost when people come here. So why not work with the Chamber of Commerce and boost the price in July and August to make it extremely expensive like it is to go to Yosemite, and make it very reasonable in May, June, and September for other people who can't afford to come in the peak season. And you may see a shift in the visitation because that's got some teeth, unlike the peaks, which you control, but the other part you don't control. Now, my question is more personal. We've known several former superintendents of Acadia, and you seem to break the mold. The typical pattern is these guys take it as a juicy plum in their career to be here for their quote-unquote final resting place. Because this is a wonderful place to retire. So what's your personal opinion of this? Will you be the next George V. Gore and stay here for 30 years? Or are you planning to punch your ticket in the best parts and then come here to retire?
I appreciate the question.
I won't make you repeat that question. It's a tough one. Yeah.
The one comment I'd say about the hotel issues, I can't resist not commenting on that one too. I think the other thing that's probably changed in the last 10 years or so is probably the number of short-term rentals here, where people are renting out their house for a week, or converting what was their home into a short-term rental property. And so that's probably changed the inventory, hotel rooms, if you will, on the island. And so this isn't the only place we're seeing that. We were seeing that in Jackson Hole too. You know, the concern I have there is sort of the broader sustainability of living, you know, and you know, can you rent a long-term place? Can you rent a place for 6 months or a year? You know, and I think as we've seen, a lot of those property owners are doing winter rentals for 6 months, but then converting it to short-term rentals for the summer season. And so, you know, that gets to our ability to recruit and retain a good workforce. The Island Explorer this summer wanted to hire 90 drivers. They were only able to hire 72. And so, you know, they're not operating with the number of staff support, and we're reading about that in the newspaper. A lot of businesses in town are facing
Ours
this.
too, yeah.
So it really gets to kind of the sustainability of this place as a community, and is this just going to be a sort of summer tourism destination, or will it be a real authentic community? And I probably all of us who are here today want to see it be a really authentic year-round community that's vibrant. That's why you're engaging in a discussion like this. And so certainly I do as well, because, you know, I've got 2 little kids, and this gets to kind of the next half of your question. You know, one of the things that made us want to move to Acadia National Park is it really has 3 things that, and having all 3 of these together is rare in the National Park Service. One is it's a phenomenal park, right? Like, you know, I told you I love to hike, I love to run, I love to bike, I love to, you know, do all these outdoor activities. And this is, as you all know, a fabulous place to do all that. 2 is it's got great communities. You know, the schools here are good. These are good places to raise your kids. It's the kind of place that, you know, as I told Darron this morning, my phone rang as I was walking out of the house, and so I was on my phone as I drove away from my house, and I can't remember if I remembered to close my garage door. And Darron said, well, you probably don't need to worry about it. And, you know, I mean, that's exactly right. You know, how many people leave their doors unlocked all the time and leave their keys in the car around here? I mean, it's the kind of place you want to raise your family. And 3 is we have incredible partners. Friends of Acadia, Schoodic Institute, College of the Atlantic. These partners allow us to do things that you can't do at many other national park units because they just don't have the broader support. So we are happy to be here. You know, I don't have any plans to update my resume anytime soon. I just want to make sure I don't screw up here so that I don't get sent off to, you know, somewhere that I really don't want to go to. I won't name names. Right. So, you know, this is we feel really fortunate to be here and really invest in the community.
And what an amazing time to come as we're celebrating our centennial. I mean, that's incredible. Yeah, it must be a lot of fun.
It is. I mean, it's humbling really to be the person who's trying to lead an organization that's setting its vision for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
It is a humbling thing, and also an organization that has such a proud history. I mean, I am the 14th superintendent in 100 years. So people tend to stay at Acadia for some time. You know, this is not a place where people hang out for a couple of years and then move on to the next promotion. I mean, there's frankly not a lot of jobs that, you know, people would want to leave here for. And the same was true, you know, when I was at Grand Teton. I mean, you know, I really wasn't looking for another job when I was at Grand Teton. There were a handful of jobs that I might have considered applying to, like literally, you know, 4 or 5. And when a park like Acadia comes open, and it's hard to not think about raising your hand for it.
I'd ask another question, but that felt so perfect as a conclusion that I wanted to thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for being supporters of Acadia. Thank you for being our friends. We're going to need your help for the next 100 years, so help us with these issues. Put on your thinking cap, and really appreciate your support.
And so before you take off, if we don't have your contacts, there was a sheet passed around, but be sure if you want us to know who you are, you leave us your name and contact. Next week, we will continue this theme about talking about the relationship between the park and its centennial anniversary, and Abe Milrushing will be speaking with our own faculty member, Chris Peterson, about climate change in the park. So that will happen on Tuesday at 9 a.m., but it will be in Deering, not up here, Deering Commons. You'll be signed and directed that way. But thank you all. It's a beautiful day. I hope you get out and are able to join the park. And thanks for visiting College of the Atlantic.
Thank you.